You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 115. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Barbera, and today I am doing a solo show, going to talk about step 3 of the Turn Autism Around approach, which is all about teaching. And I'm going to specifically dive into one of the unique features of the Turn Autism Around approach, which is table time. And I'm going to tell you what are some of the benefits and how to get started with using table time. So before I get there, I do want to let you know that my new book, Turn Autism Around, an action guide for parents of young children with early signs of autism, is available for pre-order, and it's going to come out in 2 weeks from the time that this show is airing. So if you haven't pre-ordered, or even if you have pre-ordered, you're going to want to check out turnautismaround.com, and that's where you can find out how to order the book, what the book's about, and it's also going to be the link turnautismaround.com for all the book bonuses. So if you get to the assessment in chapter 4, you're going to be able to go and get a sample assessment, get an assessment you can download right at turnautismaround.com. This is going to be a really important website for you to keep in mind. Good thing it's the same name as this podcast, so you should not forget it. Anyway, let's get to this episode all about teaching, and specifically teaching at the table. Thanks for tuning in again for another episode of Turn Autism Around podcast. So let's start talking right away about step 3 of the Turn Autism Around approach, which is all about teaching. And I am going to be talking a little bit more about teaching at the table, which is a unique thing about the Turn Autism Around approach for both parents and professionals. Many early intervention providers really do believe that teaching kids in their natural environment, specifically on the floor, is the way to go for children with developmental delays and even autism. But I have found over the past 2 decades that really using a table is much more advantageous, even for young children as young as 1.5, and definitely by age 2. So I'm going to talk about some of the advantages of using the table. But before I get there, I want to kind of go more high level and talk about the 4 steps of the Turn Autism Around approach. So I have done a whole podcast on the first step, which is assessment. And that podcast is number 108. So anytime I say a podcast number like 108, it's found by going to marybarbera.com/108. This will all be linked in the show notes under this episode, which is 115. So I'm not going to recover all of the assessment tools that I talk about in episode number 108, but that is the very first step of the Turn Autism Around approach. Step 2 of the Turn Autism Around approach is planning and making sure your goal selections are appropriate. And that is episode number 112. So in this episode, I want to cover the 3rd step, which is all about teaching. And the 4th step, which I will cover in an upcoming episode, is all about evaluating progress using simple data. So we're not going to touch the 4th step in this episode. We're going to just dive specifically into the teaching. And it's not just all about the table. I have some general procedures to use, and we're going to talk about those too. But first, let me tell you 2 stories of kids that are in the book. And one, Cody, is a former client of mine that I went to his home. He lives about a mile from me. And then I'm going to also tell you about a boy who I've never met him or his mother, but he's made great strides using the Turn Autism Around 4 steps. So Cody's mom, Jenna, has been on the podcast, and her episode we can link in the show notes. But Cody was a child who was delayed from before the age of 1. He had an early intervention team in his house. He had a physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, and teacher. They each came about an hour a week. And Cody was diagnosed with autism at 18 months of age, much to his parents' surprise. They actually thought that the doctor was going to say that he had cerebral palsy, which he ended up getting diagnosed with cerebral palsy years later. Oh, he has a mild case of cerebral palsy in addition to autism. But anyway, prior to his diagnosis of autism, and even immediately following it, he had 4 very well-meaning early intervention professionals in his home, but they were mostly following his lead and not knowing what to do about his tantrums and the self-injurious behavior, SIB, that was emerging. He would bite his knuckle, hit his head. He had pop-out words all along, but nobody had any idea how to teach him to talk more, to imitate, to match, or to play. Until I arrived and we started the Turn Autism Around Approach. Back then, I didn't call it the Turn Autism Around Approach, but I called it Applied Behavior Analysis and Skinner's Analysis of Verbal Behavior. And I was taking all of my experience, and really kids like Cody and his mom, Jenna, helped me create my step-by-step and the 4 steps of the Turn Autism Around Approach. Also, Brentley was another child who was not doing very well before his mom found my course online. But Brentley had problem behaviors. He was banging his head on hard surfaces up to 100 times a day. He could not request things or demand for things, yet she was driving him to an ABA clinic where they were trying to work on things like colors. He was leaving the clinic doors, running into the street. He's also running into water. So mom felt that he was extremely unsafe, which he was, and really confused by them trying to teach him colors and other advanced skills. So when we look at the teaching component, the 3rd step of the Turn Autism Around Approach, we have to remember that most of my podcast episodes, most of the video blogs that I have done over the past 3 or 4 years have all related somewhat to teaching. I have video blogs on teaching colors, actions, prepositions, teaching kids to talk, teaching kids manners, all those kind of things. And if you ever want to, if you're thinking, I wonder if Mary has something on that, just search Mary Autism plus the topic you're interested in. And chances are really high that I'm going to have something pop up that you are going to find helpful. So in general, the main parts of using the Turn Autism Around approach strategies is, in terms of teaching, we want to spend our time keeping children as engaged as possible. We also want to be positive and spend 95% of our time preventing problem behaviors. So that's really very general, very basic. And you're like, yeah, that's not really helping me know exactly what to do, which is what my course is, and also what my new book, Turn Autism Around, is going to help you do, because it's much more step by step. So as I said, step 1 of the Turn Autism Around approach is finding your starting point by completing assessments. And I have an easy assessment that can be done in just 10 minutes a day. And after completing the assessment and the language sample that I talk about, and the self-care checklist and the video recordings, all in episode 108, then you move on to step number 2 of the Turn Autism Around approach, which is all about how to plan. We have a 10-minute planning form that you can fill out right away. And then we also talk about goal selection. So for kids like Cody, who had 4 early intervention professionals in his home, one of the important things is to look at those goals. And in Cody's situation, maybe his OT and his PT goals were appropriate, but certainly his language, his social skill goals were too high. Brantley also, his goals were too high. They were working on colors. For Cody, they were working on things like my turn, your turn. For Lucas, I talk about him in the book and other podcasts where they were working on some versus one versus all when he couldn't even say ball if I said say ball. So that's really the biggest parts of using the Turn Autism Around approach. Everybody wants to just dive into how do I teach prepositions? How do I teach this? How do I teach this? And it's like you need to step back, look at the whole picture, look at the child. How old is a child? What's their general ability? Can they talk? What's their problem behaviors like? Because just because you want to work on colors or you can work on colors doesn't mean you should be. It may not be the best use of your time or the child's time. So step 3 is all about teaching. And like I said, we want to keep a child engaged as much as possible. Now, studies have shown that kids with a diagnosis of autism need 20 to 40 hours of ABA therapy per week. And that sounds daunting. I know it sounded daunting to me, and Lucas got 40 hours of ABA therapy at age 3 prescribed. But really what kids need with or without autism is they need to be engaged during most of their waking hours. And their waking hours turns out to be about 100 hours per week of awake time. And even Temple Grandin wrote the foreword for my new book, she's in her 70s, and she started showing signs of autism when she was just 2 years of age. So 7 decades ago, her mother, who wrote a number of good books, Eustacia Cutler, she knew enough to get Temple engaged. She sent her to a little school out of somebody's basement, and Temple's mom hired a nanny to keep her, Temple, and her sister engaged as much as possible. And that was 7 decades ago. So the more we can keep our kids engaged, the better, no matter if they have a diagnosis or not. We also want to give children 8 positives to every negative. Again, doesn't matter if they have autism or not. We all really thrive best when we're in a very positive environment. So we want to use, as for the teaching step, we want to use the assessment and the plan and all the materials I suggested in episode 112. And these same materials are in the book, in my courses. And I also have a new materials checklist with which materials I recommend and actually links to the Amazon store where you can buy them directly. So that is an affiliate link, but I have them all arranged because people were wondering what type of toys I recommend. So that is at marybarbera.com/materials. We'll link that in the show note as well. So the big parts of step number 3, before we get specifically into table time, is that we want to use step 1 and 2 so that we are definitely working on the right things. We're meeting the child where he or she is at. We're working on the right goals in the right order. We have the right materials and we're ready to go. So one of the most important materials on the materials checklist is the use of a table. Now, when we're talking about a young child, a toddler or a preschooler, we want to use a child-sized table. Preferably their feet are on the floor and they're not strapped in. They are free to come and go. And for older children, you may want to look at getting a card table or a table where their feet can hit the floor. Ideally, we want a separate learning table from the kitchen table, just so that we can utilize that table in a room where the room doesn't have a lot of distractions and it's separate from the eating. But if all you have is a kitchen table, then that's fine. That's where you start. Some people start with even a coffee table and just scoot up a little chair to have the child sit on that. Okay, so some of the advantages of table time, I know, like I said before, early intervention professionals really are from the mindset that, and even ABA practitioners, that young children, early learners, really need a lot more natural environment teaching on the floor, following the child's lead. But what I have found over the past 2 decades that I've been in the autism world is that children do best when there are a lot of trials, a lot of repetition, and that the child really needs to have high motivation to stay with you. What I found when I was in early intervention, going to homes and going to preschools, is that if you would follow the child's lead too much, they would kind of run away and get into other things. And I spent, 30 minutes just kind of not getting a whole lot accomplished. You might be playing with a puzzle on the floor and you hold up a puzzle piece that's a dog and you say dog, and the child may take it, not take it. Child gets up, runs towards the window, looks out the window. Now you're following the child's lead. The puzzle remains on the floor. You go over, you're starting to point out, oh, there's a slide out there. Look at the slide. The child doesn't say slide, runs to something else. And you can see how we're not making a lot of progress. And that's what I think happens in a lot of situations. So as part of the Turn Autism Around approach, I have developed table time. Now, table time is not what you're thinking if you're out there thinking, oh, it's ABA, it's discrete trial, you make the child sit at the table, they're not happy, it doesn't look natural. No, we're basically bringing all the fun materials, all the reinforcers to the table, and we are engaging the child in those fun activities and making the work, quote unquote, fun. We're not calling it work. We're not forcing a child to stay with us. If the child wants to leave, they can leave. So one of the biggest things you have to do before you would expect a child to sit at a table is you need to, as much as possible, to sanitize the rest of the room so that the rest of the room is actually not that fun. So we have all the fun things at the table. We have bubbles, we have some edibles, we have a drink, we might have electronics, we have cause and effect toys, and those are really fun, and we can get the child engaged and happy. And then very slightly, once we have the child super happy, we can start sliding in some easy demands that are easy and fun, and the child doesn't even know that they are working and learning, and they come to love table time. It signifies that we're going to actually concentrate. It builds attention. We're working on all the quote unquote good behaviors, or a fancier term is pro-social behaviors. We're going to work on attending, sitting, talking, imitating, matching, following directions. Also, one of the advantages of having a table is once you do start working on things like matching or puzzle building, object imitation, you have a flat surface. The area is very well paired, and so it's not a constant, I have to create a whole natural environment teaching lesson plan. Basically, intensive teaching looks pretty much the same, or table time looks pretty much the same on Monday as it does on Tuesday. Table time also looks the same whether it's mom doing it or the speech therapist doing it or the teacher doing it at a preschool. So we use very familiar toys, very, very easy cause and effect type toys and materials and lots of reinforcement to get repetitive trials going so that a child hears the word water many times, hears the word cow many times, hears the word ear from Potato Head's ear many times. And we use what we call multiple control. I explain that a little bit in the book, how we pair a word, we say it, we show it to the child. So if the child is echoing it, they're not only echoing it, they're actually getting the piece, the ear, to put in Potato Head's ear, or the cow to put in an animal puzzle. They're getting it, they want it, so it's part man, part tact, or they can see it, and part echo. And that's what we call multiple control. These activities at the table build not only the skill of the child, but it builds the skill and the confidence of the parent, of the therapist, whether that's a novice therapist or seasoned therapist. And these procedures really work not for one child, but for all the children. Not to say that it's a slam dunk for every child. There are children that refuse to sit, really hard to find good reinforcers, really tricky to program for. And that just makes us as behavior analysts and speech therapists and teachers more like we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to figure out what to do for this specific child. But in general, staying positive, keeping a child engaged, pairing the table, sanitizing the room, making things repetitive and fun so that the child is running to the table really makes for a great environment for learning, and for learning day in, day out, without a lot of natural environment teaching, lesson plans, and those sorts of things. So you really want to spend your time. If a child does leave the table, watch where they go. What are they looking at? What are they doing? Or they're rocking on a rocking chair, or they're picking up a figurine from the floor. Okay, so then maybe the room, there's figurines on the floor. Maybe those should be in a box at the table that you can play with the child with the figurines. Maybe the rocking chair, maybe a little child rocking chair could come to the table, or you could use that interspersed with table time. So you also, besides sanitizing the room, first of all, you have to find a room or a corner of the room that would be an ideal space. So I don't like to use a child's bedroom, especially if they have trouble sleeping, but we want a room that can be pared down with just not a whole lot of things cluttered around the floor. And that just may be organizing one weekend and putting things in bins that the child can't open easily. And not to say that all day long we're going to keep everything that closed up with the child with nothing to do, but it really doesn't do anyone any good to have Potato Head and all the parts strewn about the room, and puzzle pieces and things not organized. So I know you teachers out there who are super organized will understand and probably agree that the more organized you can be with toys and materials, the better children will do, because children, especially children with delays, with or without a diagnosis of autism, need a lot of structure to learn, play, and especially language skills. So using the whole 4-step Turn Autism Around approach encourages parents and professionals to really create those bins, to create really helpful table time activities, and to keep those table time activities super short, like up to 15 minutes a day to start, pairing the table, just slipping in very, very easy activities that the child likes. And if the child is having a tantrum, not coming to the table, we want to reverse things and really think about, okay, what don't I have here that could really turn things around? Because every child who's delayed needs to catch up. And the more we can help the child catch up, the better everyone will do. Creating a table time space is beneficial and enables you and your child or clients to really have some success. Children will come to understand that great things happen at the table and will become eager to be a part of what's happening there. It really is not unusual to have children running to the table, or when I'd arrive at their house, at Cody's house, I can just picture it, 10 years ago, I'd arrive at his house and he would go, and he was only 2 years old, and he would start dragging out the table and dragging out the materials. That's the kind of excitement and enthusiasm we want to create with our children. As I said, I recommend keeping these table time sessions really short, but we're going to be using the same strategies, repeating words up to 3 times, being super positive, 8 positives to every negative, trying to engage your child every space around the room all day long as much as possible. So that a trip to the grocery store can also be pairing words, having the child be happy, building excitement for going, having some reinforcers on hand so that we can deliver reinforcement when the child is being good. Bath time can also become super reinforcing. So this table time promotes parent education so that they can learn these strategies to expand and generalize the skills throughout the day. So in summary, the Turn Autism Around approach includes 4 steps. Step 1 is assessment. That's covered in episode 108. Step 2 is planning, gathering materials, making sure goals are appropriate. That's episode 112. And now this episode, 115, we talked about step 3, which is teaching. Teaching is done both at a table as well as throughout the day to keep your child and clients engaged as much as possible. As I said, I will cover step 4 of the Turn Autism Around approach, which is all about evaluating progress using easy data, all explained in my book, Turn Autism Around, as well as my online courses. So by using these strategies outlined in this episode and also in the book and the courses, you are setting your child up for learning success. Remember, we want to use 95% of our time preventing problem behavior. So if you hear yourself saying no, stop, frequently, really need to rethink that and try to be more positive. Also, engaging your child in a positive manner, child-friendly, as much as possible throughout the day is key. Don't forget to pre-order my new book, TurnAutismAround.com, and check the same website, TurnAutismAround.com, for all your book bonuses. And I will see you here next week. Well, you'll hear me. I probably won't see you, but I have a special episode next week with my husband, Dr. Charles Barbera, talking all about his experience raising Lucas and some advice for dads of kids with autism. And then the following week, we'll be airing a podcast episode with Dr. Temple Grandin. Just 2 more weeks till my book, Turn Autism Around, comes out. Can't wait. So turnautismaround.com for all the details, and I'll catch you next week.